please welcome to the podium Dr. Louise Muir, President, New York Historical Society.
Thanks so much for joining us today, to all of you, and many, many thanks to those of you, our elected officials in the great state of New York, who have made this historic moment possible. I wanted to talk a little bit about New York Historical's work and why we are not only so honored to be the venue for this morning's historic announcement and signing, but also the kind of work that we've done that coincides so perfectly with the spirit of what is about to happen today. We are an institution that for the past 2 decades and more has told the story of the great history and important history of slavery in New York and the evolution of this state towards freedom and equality for all. As I'm sure each and every one of you knows, New York was a state in which slavery until 1827 was allowed, although there were many voices that called for abolition, including some of our founders like Alexander Hamilton and John Jay and others. It was a long, long time before this state recognized the importance of freedom and equality for all. And so in 1827, New York did finally abolish slavery. But the history continued, and New York very much through the beginning of the Civil War was a place, especially New York City, that profited from the South. New York was called a Southern city. New York industry, commerce and industry, much of it was fueled by cotton. And so really, until the outbreak of the Civil War, the city and the state more generally, but less so, but certainly the city, was heavily implicated in the history of slavery. This institution has endeavored to focus on the important contributions that were made right from the beginning, from the very first enslaved people who were brought to this city in the 17th century by the Dutch, and who built the wall on Wall Street, who built Broadway, which would eventually, and somewhat nicely today, lead to Harlem. This is a city that depended on the hard work and efforts and labor that was not compensated for so many years of people who had come originally from Africa. The happier part of the story is one that we're very proud to tell on a permanent basis in our permanent gallery on our first floor. I hope some of you have had the chance to see it on your way in this morning, or will see it on your way out today. It is an installation that we call Composite Nation. It was based on a speech that Frederick Douglass gave at the end of the Civil War, when he believed that this nation was on its way to embracing everyone, irrespective of race or religion, economic circumstances at all. It spells out a vision which is marvelous, and which, though Frederick Douglass sadly lived long enough to see would not be carried out in his lifetime, we endeavor to carry out today. And once again, to have this bill signing here in our Patricia D. Klingenstein Library at New York Historical so resonates with the spirit and the work that we do, particularly to educate young people and to help them to understand the potential of democracy to include each and every one of us as Americans. So thank you so much once again for joining us today. Truly appreciate it. just going to come back to briefly answer a few questions I've been asked about the art in this room. The beautiful stained glass windows that you see represent the European who came to New York, then New Amsterdam. On my left is the edict, a representation of the Edict of Nantes by Mary Tillinghast, which is a beautiful portrayal of people who came to the New World, as it was then, in search of religious freedom. And on my right is Henry Hudson coming down from the north on the half moon. And of course, that representation is central to the recognition that the harbor would be the place that would make New York City certainly everything that it was. But the Hudson River more generally has made New York really the capital of the world. Around the room are examples of art in our collection. You will see a portrayal of John Brown. We have the famous portrait of John Brown in our collection, a man who, as you know, strove so hard to end slavery and sacrifice, was a martyr in those efforts. You'll also see portraits of very many people, actors, all New Yorkers. Everyone in this room is represented as a New Yorker and in the role that they played. The bookcases, actually we have a most marvelous project, which is to expand our footprint. So many of the bookcases have been emptied as we prepare for breaking ground on our new building. But these bookcases typically house the libraries of some of our earliest Americans. And what is quite curious is that those libraries tend to be the works of Europeans, because that's what our American founding generation, they were reading about the philosophy of liberty and equality for all that were books by Europeans and treatises by Europeans. More generally, this institution really houses tells all stories to all people. It houses marvelous collections of documents and works that tell the history not only of New York, but of the nation as well. So while you're here, I hope you have a chance to look around. We have, those of you who are from upstate New York, we have just commissioned our first work by a contemporary indigenous artist, Kay Walkingstick, and we have a show of her works, including our Niagara Falls, which she created specifically for this institution. It's a very, very beautiful show. And I see a lot of activity in the back, so I don't want to preempt the governor, so I'm going to sit down, but please feel free to ask me any questions that you might have. Thank you again.
welcome Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado, Congressman Jamal Bowman, Majority Leader Crystal People-Stokes, Assemblymember Walker, Assemblymember Taylor, Assemblymember Jackson, Assemblymember Zinnerman, Assemblymember Vanell, Assemblymember Heineman, Senator Cordell, Senator Brisport, Senator Comrie, Senator Hoylman, and Councilmember Brewer. Senator Cordell Clear. And please welcome Member of Assembly Khalil Anderson. Please welcome Dr. Uhuru Williams, Assemblymember Mikael Solages, Senator James Sanders Jr., Speaker Carl Hastie, Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and please welcome the 57th Governor of the great state of New York, Governor Kathy Hochul.
Good morning, good morning. Good morning, thank you very much. In a few minutes, I'll sign a bill authorizing the creation of a community commission to study the history of slavery in New York State. We'll study various forms of reparations and how we can help right the wrongs of the past. And I want to acknowledge some incredible leaders who helped bring us to this date, and I want to thank my partner in government, our Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado. Thank you, Antonio. Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, thank you for your leadership in the Senate. Speaker Carl Hastie, getting this through the Assembly. And our sponsors, Senator James Sanders and Representative Mikael Solages. Thank you. Luis Mir, I want to thank you for welcoming us to this majestic place that reminds us that this is a state and a nation steeped in incredible history, some of it positive and some not. And I want to thank Dr. Williams also, who's going to give us a perspective of how this issue has been addressed in other states. My Empire State Development Commissioner and CEO, Hope Knight, has joined us, Public Advocate Jimani Williams, and all of our elected officials in state and local government. I'm grateful for your presence here today, and Reverend Al Sharpton is on his way. Before I speak about this bill, though, I want to share with you about how we got here. And I'll share my own personal journey, my story of how I arrived at this point. But first, I want to talk about our shared journey as Americans and New Yorkers. More than 400 years ago, The first slaves were violently kidnapped, stolen from their families and their homes. They were brought in chains to the shores of what eventually becomes the United States of America. And these enslaved peoples literally built much of our nation with their sweat, their blood, their sorrow. And right over here, we have a statue of Thomas Jefferson. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. At the same time, he owned over 600 slaves. Now, in New York, we like to think we're on the right side of this. You know, slavery was a product of the South, the Confederacy. We're proud of the legacy of incredible warriors for justice and liberation and the thousands of New York soldiers who went to fight these battles on the right side of history in the Civil War. We're proud to be home of courageous leaders like Harriet Tubman, conductor of the Underground Railroad, buried up in Auburn, New York, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, and abolitionists like John Brown, whose farm is way in the North Country. We're proud to embrace the deliverance from slavery from the Underground Railroad itself, which ran from New York all the way to Canada, crossing over in Niagara Falls, where I was yesterday. And that had the strong support of much goodwill from residents of this state. So it's easy for us to pat ourselves on the back, right? We did all this. A lot of other states didn't step up. We had the leaders here. We took this on. We can say we're the heroes. We're the ones who fought against slavery. And indeed, many did. What is hard to embrace is the fact that our state also flourished from that slavery. It's not a beautiful story, but indeed it is the truth. In 1847, Frederick Douglass, and I just left his exhibit moments ago. You should go visit this to see his journey. He spoke at Market Hall in New York City, and he declared that he would hold America up to the lightning scorn of moral indignation over slavery. He called this the duty of a true patriot, because someone who really loves their country will rebuke it and not excuse its sins. Today, I challenge all New Yorkers to be the patriots and rebuke and not excuse our role in benefiting from the institution of slavery. According to the New York Historical Society, where we are today, as many as 20% of colonial New Yorkers, 20% of us, were enslaved Africans. A fifth of our entire population was in bondage. Beginning in 1630, some 15,000 people died and were buried in the African burial ground just feet from City Hall, up from Broadway and the Stock Exchange. Think about that. It's not talked about a lot. That's a problem. New York has long been the center of American commerce, Wall Street, banking, shipping, insurance, the economic engines of our entire country. And they thrived because they can trade in commodities that were produced by slaves. And there was a slave market. Yes, here in New York, there was a slave market where people bought and sold other human beings with callous disregard. And it happened right on Wall Street for more than a century. And even though it officially closed when slavery was abolished in New York in 1827, our state still remained a dominant player in the illegal slave trade. The practice continued, and our financial and business institutions prospered. Even when the Confederacy surrendered at Appomattox in 1865, the end of that terrible, bloody conflict, it didn't mark the end of slavery's terrible wounds. Didn't end then. If it did, we wouldn't be having a conversation today. Former slaves and their children and their children's and their children across our nation have been haunted for generations by racism and disenfranchisement. Millions of people, even though free on a piece of paper, were still trapped by Jim Crow, stripped of their rights, even including the right to participate in our democracy, the right to vote. and others were stalked by death by men in white robes, the Klan and the lynch mob. It didn't stop in the early days. Redlining, housing discrimination, segregation, economic oppression, all were designed to keep Black and brown Americans from reaching that first rung on that ladder of success, the ladder of opportunity. And many were kicked down when they finally got there. It's an ugly truth, but as patriots, as Frederick Douglass said, we must bear witness to it. You know, New York was no different. Some of you may know the story. In 1892, Port Jervis was a quaint little hamlet, about 9,000 people, just a few hours by train from here. People traveled up there to get fresh air and fish for trout. It was idyllic. It was mostly white. And on one June morning, a gentleman named Robert Lewis, a Black man who drove a carriage for a hotel, was dragged down the street by an angry mob. He was beaten and hung from a tree after being accused of attacking a white woman, although it was actually her boyfriend who had been involved. Let me repeat this. This happened not in the Deep South, not in Tulsa. It happened right here in New York. So this is an American story. It's a New York story, and we all share in it. And even after the long, hard road of the civil rights movement, it wasn't until 2009 that Congress even apologized for the institution of slavery. Now, if someone had kidnapped, beaten, enslaved, or murdered a member of my family, I think I would have wanted an apology at bare minimum. Let me say this. I know the word reparations brings up a lot of conflicting ideas for people. A lot of people instinctively dig in when they hear it without really thinking about what it means or why we need to talk about it. I'm the daughter of social justice Catholics. My parents, not politically active, but very socially active. They taught their 6 children about Dr. Martin Luther King when we were very young and his message of nonviolence and the fight for equality. Parents themselves were involved in the civil rights movement, and they tried to integrate our blue-collar community where most people worked at the steel plant, hard work by day, through the night. This blue-collar community back in the 1960s, my parents were trying to be part of a program to integrate, allow Black families a chance to escape the city and move out. It was a conservative town. Didn't go well. My parents ended up comforting one family who had a cross burned on their lawn in the town I grew up in. They came to our house. As a little kid, I remember a lot of tears. But despite the criticism my parents received at that time, they knew it was the right thing to do. Those are the values I was taught. Just do what's right. When I attended Syracuse University, I met students from all over the world. Every race, every ethnic group, every religion. People had very little in common with my background growing up in that town. I became a student activist, fighting to stop our university from investing in companies doing business in South Africa because it propped up apartheid, a system where the Black majority were ruled by the white minority. Black and white students banded together, and I'm proud that we convinced the university to do what was right, and they did. Another cause I championed was, as a student, 18, 19 years old, was to honor the first Black Heisman Trophy winner. Incredible athlete, went to school at Syracuse, Ernie Davis. Everybody know Ernie Davis? 44. He played for Syracuse, had a great career, but died, struck down by illness so early in his days as a professional ball player. He had no recognition on our campus, the first Black Heisman Trophy winner. I tried to change that and get the stadium named after Ernie Davis when I was a student. As you can tell, I didn't win that battle, but I was successful in getting the football field itself, the Ernie Davis Legends Field, renamed in his honor. The lesson I learned at a young age was sometimes moving the ball down the field takes more time, but the goal is always worth pursuing. I'm sharing this because I want New Yorkers to know the small steps in my development. Many of us grew up in very homogeneous communities, all black, all brown, all Asian, all white. And sometimes it's just difficult to expand beyond that, to embrace differences and experiences so foreign to us, so different. Understanding each other takes work, and we rarely get it right all at once. But I say this, it's essential that we try. Witnessing my parents' work, their values, that powerful sense of empathy, all that made me who I am. And I see that on display in our communities all over. People from around every part of the world coexist. And all of us embrace the uniqueness which comes from being called a New Yorker. We never forget we have a proud history in our harbor, the Statue of Liberty. So many impoverished immigrants sailed past it seeking a better life, including my own grandparents. And as we practice acceptance and welcome others, I think about what Dr. King said. Great line. We all came in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. Isn't that the truth? Now, my grandparents were able to escape great poverty and sail here on the upper decks to pursue their dreams. They had nothing, but they were in the upper decks. They can get some fresh air. The slaves were forced to come, chained in the belly of the ships, and they weren't welcomed with the opportunity for hard work and a paycheck. They just did the hard work. They didn't get a union card like Grandpa did that lifted us into better circumstances. He could work with his hands, work hard. They didn't get the union card and a paycheck. They got shackles and a lash. And while New York does have an incredible legacy as a cradle of freedom, if we brought all those who were on this journey, the early abolitionists and the people who fought and Civil Rights Act, whether they were black or white, we all brought them to today in 2023, almost 2024, what would they see today? Black and brown Americans in segregated cities, sometimes choked with dirty air. Black Americans still oppressed by elevated rates of poverty, death, disease, illness, suffering the highest rates of infant, child, and maternal mortality. They would see descendants of slaves still lagging behind white families in attaining generational wealth, home ownership, and higher education. They would come from the past and see today and say, your work is not done. And yet, we take comfort in Dr. King's words again. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. As the leader of this state, I believe it is our obligation to help that arc bend toward justice. This bill is a continuation of the work that began when New York began slavery back in 1827. We've had a lot of steps along the way, some backwards, some forwards, many profound failures. But by signing this bill today, I'm authorizing the creation of a commission, a committee to study what reparations might look like in New York. And let's be clear about what reparations means. It doesn't mean fixing the past, undoing what happened. We can't do that. No one can. But it does mean more than giving people a simple apology 150 years later. This bill makes it possible to have a conversation, a reasoned debate about what we want the future to look like. And I can think of nothing more democratic than that. And to those who think that even having this conversation is unfair or wrong, I say it would be wrong not to have it. Because to bend that arc of justice, we have to be willing to talk about the hard things, right? Yes. To debate them and argue them. It's all right. We owe it to each other and our fellow New Yorkers to have a candid, good faith conversation. And I don't want to pretend I didn't have some concerns about this. I know many have. But here's what I do know. Anyone thinks that racism and hatred toward blacks no longer exists, tell that to the families of the 10 victims in the grocery store in Tops at the massacre in Buffalo, who once again will be staring at empty chairs over their Christmas dinner. And Crystal Peoples-Stokes, our majority leader from the Assembly, who is here, knows this. It's her district, 10 minutes from where I live. Reverend Ale was there. Many of our leaders came up to try and comfort a community. But that empty chair still exists because of white supremacism is alive and well in this country. And we must be the ones who call it out and stop it. That's what I'm talking about. And I've spoken about my upbringing in that gritty steel town that I love so much. It shaped who I am. But I cannot turn away from them either. And I think about the immigrants and the children of immigrants who've come here since the end of slavery. They will say, we had no involvement in slavery, we came after. Our families did nothing to do with it. None of our relatives were slave owners. And there's a part of me that worries about leaping into this conversation because of the racial division and strife it could sow. People say, what does this have to do with us in 2023? We abhor slavery. We wouldn't have done that. We opposed Jim Crow in our mind. We studied this, it's wrong. We weren't there when our ancestors weren't there when all this happened, but here's what we have to talk about the difference. We're a nation and a state of immigrants who sought out the promise of the American dream. They came here because they wanted to. They thought there were better days that lie ahead by making that journey here. Millions and millions who fled oppression and violence or great poverty from countries like Ireland, like my grandparents, or Poland, like my husband's parents, and more recently from every corner of the planet, they're finding their way here. These huddled and tired masses came here to seek a better life. They came here to raise their families in safety, to practice their religion freely, to start a small business, get an education. And indeed, our own founding fathers came here for freedom and opportunities. But therein lies the difference. The slaves, people who were enslaved, didn't come here willingly to pursue a dream, but they came in bondage to live a nightmare. And we have to ask, do those of us whose family came here to pursue a dream not have a role to play in ending that nightmare? Yes. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. The truth is, we are all held back when millions of our neighbors struggle to lift their families up generation after generation, struggle to give their kids a good education, quality health care that they deserve, struggle while fighting the indignities of racism. Now, if this committee can present a viable path forward to helping the descendants of New York slaves and addressing the harms and disparities that exist in education, that exist in housing, that exist in health care, that exist in the environment, that, my friends, will lift all of us up. It'll strengthen our economy. It'll strengthen our communities. It'll strengthen the bonds that bring us closer together. That's what can happen. And if we can reduce poverty and give people access to good paying jobs and help them lift themselves up, that's what we're talking about. That's an investment in all of us. Because when these individuals have a chance to survive, black and brown communities have the same chances as the white communities, that's what we're talking about. They'll live longer, healthier lives. So here's what we're talking about. Working together so the children of today are not weighed down by the shackles of the past. That is the message we are talking about here today. Now, I've spoken a long time because I needed you to know what's in my heart. Before we bring up Reverend Al Sharpton, I want to share a parting story with you. In June of 2020, not that long ago, hundreds of residents of Port Jervis, you heard me talk about Port Jervis a few minutes ago, they came together and marched. They're members of the Friends of Robert Lewis Committee. They spoke about their efforts to elect a memorial plaque, which we ended up doing last year. They did that so his lynching would not be covered up and forgotten, so that this terrible crime would not be buried in our history. And Ralph Drake, who is white and founded the committee, said, "There's no hero in this story, but the town must be that hero in confronting its legacy. The town must be the hero." The people came together. They were the heroes. And today, this is our opportunity. New Yorkers, all of us, can be the heroes and do the hard work of acknowledging the ugly truths of the past and do our part to keep Dr. King's dream alive and help bend the moral universe a little bit closer for justice by our actions here today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. With that, thank you, everyone. Thank you. With that, I'd like to invite up Reverend Al Sharpton for his reflections. Thank you, Reverend.
To the governor and to all that have gathered, to all of our elected officials, let me say that this is a very historic day because it's the beginning of a process to repair damage done. As one that has marched all over this state for many years and that looks at today where we still see blacks making 70 cents to every dollar whites make, somewhere there has to be where we pause and repair the damage that was done. You cannot heal unless you deal with the wounds. And this bill will put a committee, a commission together to be healing the wounds. I think about many years ago when we would talk about reparations, and I was a younger man, and I would go to reparations rally with Queen Mother Moore and led and all the way up to working with people like Dr. Ron Daniels. It was not a popular thing to talk about reparations. So only those that have seen people marginalized for even raising the issue can understand the historic significance of today. I get up every morning looking at a scar on my chest from when I was stabbed leading a march in Bensonhurst, Brooklyn, because a young man named Yusuf Hawkins was told you didn't belong in the neighborhood, and they shot and killed him. And I led a march. A man stabbed me leading that march one morning. And I never let them take the scar off because that scar reminds me every day of why I believe that we're still here doing what we do. But I also want to say that we've had great statesmen and women and governors before, but I want to give credit to this governor for having the audacity and courage to do what others wouldn't do. And I know she had to wrestle with it, and I know her political advisors told her it's too risky. But she did it because it's right. I met with her last Thursday on several issues that we're dealing with nationally, and she told me she had decided to sign this bill. And she said that it's going to be unpopular to some, but I'm going to do what's right. And I told her I'm going to be there with you. And Some of the media will act as though she met us here and she gave Reverend Allen, all of us, a check for billions of dollars. But that's not what this is. This is the beginning of healing the scars, like the scar on my chest, because we can never be one state unless we heal the scars. Yes, where you go and cut deals on Wall Street, our forefathers were put on blocks and sold like a soap. And from there, through the battles of Marcus Garvey and Adam Clayton Powell and Percy Sutton and Shirley Chisholm, we fought our way every step of the way. Nobody gave us nothing. Nobody sponsored us. We had to fight our way. The battle for civil rights was not below the Mason-Dixie line. The largest port of slave trade was in Charleston, South Carolina, and Wall Street, New York. So this today starts a process of taking the veil off of northern inequality and saying we must repair the damage, and it can be an example for this nation. And I want to thank not one that comes from the shrewd city of New York with lights and Times Square, and that's so savvy and sophisticated. It took a courageous young white woman from Western New York to say, I'm going to do what all the urban men before me wouldn't do. And we will not forget that. That's why I came. James Saunders and Assemblywoman, you've done us well. And you've made a step in history. I do not know where the commission will go, but I know that history is made because there is a commission and there is a recognition. And sometimes, even if you can't take away the pain and the scar, we gain a lot by being recognized that is due to be repaired. And in that spirit, I bring you one of those that have walked the walk and talked the talk and has been part of bringing this state together a long time. I'm sure that our ancestors are proud of the majority leader of the New York State Senate, Andrea Stewart-Cousins.
Thank you so much, Reverend. It's just, how do you go after Reverend Sharpton? Only on a day like this can I feel the confidence and the power to stand here after this amazing civil rights leader shows up to commend what's happened in this state and the fact that we do have a governor who is honest enough to say out loud that this was hard, honest enough to say that she knows there will be pushback, but honest enough within herself to know that this has to be done. New York has a role to play. We have a role to play in telling the truth. We have a role to play in leading, and the historic nature of the leadership of this state makes it imperative. Who would have thought that there would be the first woman governor, that there would be not one, but two African-American leaders of the state legislature? Both of us history makers in our own right. Why do you get the opportunity to do that? because you have a story to tell. Everybody brings their own stuff to these roles, and I get to bring mine. I'm the daughter of a woman who was born in Harlem, New York. Yeah, Harlem. Who wanted to be a lawyer. She couldn't be that. But she was the best secretary you could find, typing 100 words a minute. But corporate America would not hire her. She said she used to go by the storefronts and watch white women typing, and they would call it hunting and pecking. And her fingers could fly. But not here, not in New York. I remember Adam Clayton Powell, my mother told me, led marches, begging corporate America to hire qualified black people. Didn't happen. My dad, World War II, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, injured in battle, served in a segregated army, and came back to a segregated country. And in New York, worked for a corporation that guaranteed he would stay in the basement because there would not be any promotions for him. People came, yes, from all over, Poland and Ireland. They were my father's boss because they were entitled. The GI Bill did not pertain to black soldiers. Did not. And people talk about the gap of wealth. My father was told that public housing was the government's answer for the redlining and the discrimination, and that's where we lived. And public schools educated us. But the reality is that when my parents died, they didn't get a chance to see me as senator. They didn't give us any inheritance. We didn't have anything other than their faith, their courage, their name, their fight, and their fortitude. And I stand here today, a proud leader who understands that this conversation can't be had without telling the truth, that the disparities are real. They were contrived, they were derived, they were deliberate. And we can't keep having generations growing up thinking that, oh, these people just lazy. That is not the case. There's no one that can say, having looked at what the enslaved, beaten, starved African who were brought to this country were be able to build despite nothing. And that's why, in this moment, we have to be courageous and understand that, yes, there will be pushback, but our ancestors have pushed forward so that we could be here at this moment. I really want to thank Senator Brisport starting that race, Senator Sanders bringing us over the finishing line, Senator Salages, I'm sorry, didn't mean to, you gotta stay there. Assemblywoman Salages. But I'm going to say that I have the privilege of representing the most diverse Senate in the history of this state. The most diverse. We are a supermajority of black, white, Asian, brown, and there was not a dry eye, be clear about this, when we made that decision to pass that bill. And not only the people of color who will be impacted. But our colleagues recalled the experiences of learning what had happened to their neighbors, to the families of their friends. They wanted this done just as much as each and every one of us. So, again, thank you, Governor, for allowing us to begin the conversations that repairs, that's what reparation is, repairs, by telling the truth about the damage that has been done. Now, we know that there are two houses, two great houses. We got the Senate, I represent the Senate, but I got a wonder twin, and we have been working together, each house, to, again, make sure that the promise of our being in these positions are actually fulfilled. I want to introduce my friend, my colleague, Assembly Speaker Carl Hastings.
So before I begin, I want to acknowledge a couple of more of my colleagues who joined us. I know Clyde Vernell is here, and also Linda Rosenthal is here as well. Oh, and Senator Parker is here, has joined us as well. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought they announced you, and Latrice Walker from Brooklyn. You know, I have lots of things I want to say, and sometimes I will write down just little bullets for me because I don't really like to read prepared speeches. But I really just want to get up here and speak from what the heart told me to speak to today. So there's a lot of things that I do feel and I want to say. You know, still to this day, when I get introduced, people will introduce me as the first African American who's had this position of being Speaker. And I often tell people it's a great footnote in history, but if that's the only way that I'm going to be remembered when I'm done, then I would not have fulfilled, I'd say, the mission. And today's bill signing is one of those missions that I feel was my calling when my colleagues gave me the privilege of being Speaker in 2015. Almost 9 years ago, they gave me that privilege. And to be here, to understanding, because I'm not sure people really understand the true history of slavery. And sometimes people think it ended in 1865 and there was nothing else, and we just fast forwarded today and everybody's equal. But that's not the case, you know, at all. When you look at slavery and its contributions to today's criminal justice system, to all of the inequities that we heard the governor and the great Reverend Al Sharpton and the majority leader speak out, these are structural things that have affected us and have put us behind. And so to have this conversation, like I said, in my conversations, and I'm gonna thank this great governor, this is not just about who we're gonna write a check to and what the amount is. It begins the conversation of one, recognizing the issues that affected Black people and descendants of slaves in this state. You know, New York is known as the Empire State for a number of reasons, and one is because sometimes as New York goes, the country goes. And I think at some point this country needs to recognize what was done to people. And hopefully with the courage and I'd say in brevity that was showed in this, and you know, I just want to say to our great governor, you know, in about 2011, before the Obamacare came in, I happened to had a privilege to be with President Obama at dinner, and somebody in the audience said, "Why would you do this now? Why don't you wait for your second term? Like, this could cost us politically." And President Obama said, "I'd rather be a one-term president and make sure that people had health care than to be a two-term president and have people still continue not to have health care." And so to you, Governor Hochul, this is one of those moments where you put doing what's right over what may be perceived as the political thing to do and just say, we can wait. That conversation can wait. Or you could have said, I'll do it when I get to my final term, which I hope is a long time from now because you've been a great governor. But you just said this is the right thing that must be done. And so I do want to give a big shout out to you for doing this. It's not going to be popular. It's going to be tough, and because people always feel like, why do we have to have this conversation? It's over, but it's not over. Every time we go back home and we look in our communities, particularly those of us who represent communities of color, we get reminded every day that it's not over and that the struggle continues. And I want to say to my uncle, Reverend Al Sharpton, who actually saw me, grow up, and I always watched him, even in some of the toughest times and some of the toughest places. He got a lot of spears and things thrown at him, and he took those shots, and he took those shots, and he just kept on going. And a lot of the pride that I feel was because I got to watch him when I was growing up, politically. So, Rev, I just want to thank you for all the influence and just the leadership that, again, even when you took some very unpopular stances. But here we are today about to have this bill signing. And to my partner, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, I remember when she called me and we talked about this, and I said, yes, I think this is real and we should do it. And she says, all right, well, I'm going to get to work. And she made sure to make it happen in her house as well. And to our wonderful bill sponsor, Mikhail Salages, who also took a lot of shots it's like today is one of those moments where you say, everything that I went through was worth it, to get here today. So I just want to tell you how proud I am of you. You're an extraordinary member and leader in our House. And so with that, I also get to introduce, somebody said that when they talk about the Senate as a promotion, I joke and say it's a demotion when you go from the Senate to, with all love and affection. And then, but Mikhail had an extraordinary partner in Senator James Sanders in getting this across the finish line. So it was my pleasure to introduce the Senator from Queens, James Sanders.
All I can say is I'm grateful not to go in back of Reverend Sharpton speaking. I'm very grateful. Reverend Dr. Sharpton, I too know a little bit about what you're talking about. I have 9 stitches in my head from 3 incidents where I just didn't know my place. And I still don't know my place, but I don't want any more. I mean, who do you thank at a time like this? Of course, you'd have to thank God, but I would be remiss if I didn't thank my governor. And Governor, let me tell you this: I will be wherever you need me to go so I can speak to people and tell them what was done here. To our majority leaders, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who has corrected me more ways than I can count, to our Assembly Speaker, to all of my colleagues and everyone up here today. If I don't name you, forgive me. I would be remiss if I did not say that I'm here because my sharecropper father and my domestic worker mother, we fled a tyranny. We fled a terror. We fled an unjust government that was working on terrorism, and I am an immigrant. I'm the first generation. We fled the South. We fled all of those folk who were doing horrible things to us. I feel good when I saw Frederick Douglass downstairs guarding us. I saw good. I know that this is a good place when Frederick Douglass has it. But I want to dedicate this conversation, my brief one, to the people of Seneca Village. Now, we are walking distance from one of those things in American history. Seneca Village was an African-American community. Indeed, it was a mixed community feet from here that in 1853, The New York State legislature passed a bill saying that they're going to put Central Park up there. The legislature said that we're getting rid of those people. It's the legislature, and the people who did that, the people of the time, was the governor was Horatio Seymour, a Democrat. William H. Ludlow, he was the speaker, he was a Democrat. And the temporary Senate president was William McMurray, he was a Democrat. All Democrats who did this, a different type of Democrat, let's be clear. But those people in Seneca Village tried to live a life. They lived a middle-class life. They had more black home ownership. Imagine if we would have let that happen. Imagine if that would have happened in America. They were driven out and forced to go elsewhere and never paid what they should have gotten for theirs. But they were also an integrated community. They had an integrated church that had a little bit of everybody. In 1853, they were more integrated than most of our churches are today on Sunday morning. So I say this, my friends, I say that this one has to be dedicated to them because we sit in the shadows of the Seneca Village, but I actually stand on their shoulders. And this is why I can see the new New York that we're building. A place that's going to be greater than it was before. The new New York, I can see it arising, a place where the color of your skin is no more important than the color of your eyes. A place where you'll be judged by the content of your character and not by your melanin. The new New York that our governor has been bold enough to make us walk towards. This day belongs to the people of Seneca and the Senecas throughout the U.S. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of Senecas in all of them. So every time that we say that, the Seneca Village, rather, is a metaphor for America. And just as those Democrats put us in this hole to some degree, 3 Democrats are taking us out of this hole. 170 years later, our Democratic governor, Kathy Hochul, our Democratic majority leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, and our Democratic speaker, Carl Hastie, are undoing the damage that was done before. I am very proud to serve with such people. I'm very proud that we are going to dedicate this. I'm also proud that my son is in the audience watching this. Anthony, so on behalf of my sharecropper mother, my father, and my domestic mother, who they took my father out of school in the 3rd grade so he could make other people rich. But he never had malice. He never was angry. He never was wanting any type of revenge. All he wanted was a chance of equality. And that's what we're fighting for today, the equality of opportunity. Just everybody at the same place, same starting field. Thank you for doing that. And I could not do this alone. Get ready. I could not do this alone. I had to have a partner in government, somebody so dynamic that she could take all of the hits that she had to take and still keep on going. And I'm talking about Assemblywoman Michael Szilagyi.
You know, as I look at this flag, today I see that we are moving towards a more perfect union. And so I dedicate my comments to Benjamin Price, who was the last person born into chattel slavery on Staten Island. He passed away at the age of 100 in the 1900s. He was a big deal because his obituary was in the New York Times and other prominent newspapers across the country. But if you went to go visit his burial ground today, a historical black burial ground, the eternal resting place of 1,000 Black men, women, baby, and children's, you will see a strip mall. You will see a convenience store. That property, deeded in 1850, fell victim to illegal seizure in 1954 and was ultimately paved over in the 1960s. And this is a common story. Many African burial grounds, paved over, neglected. The heartbreak, the neglect, the abuse, the vandalism extends beyond the mistreatment of the deceased. Black communities endure the same injustice through policy that cannot be erased. And our history is stained in systematic racism. As individuals, we are born into a world shaped by actions and decisions of our ancestors. Our society carries a legacy of both triumphs and tribulations, victories and injustices. With that inheritance comes a moral responsibility to confront the mistakes of the past and find solutions to the harms. In New York State, a place known for its diversity and inclusion, we understand the importance of uniting against hate. Our governor knows that, our legislature knows that, my colleagues know that. And I want to reference a report by Citigroup, a financial institution that itself made an internal report and said that it enriched itself off of slavery, said that if in 4 key racial gaps for Black New Yorkers and Americans, if we gave better wages, better education, stable housing, and made an investment into our communities, we would have closed the racial wealth gap 20 years ago, and we would have pumped $20 trillion into our economy. Imagine where we would be as a state. Today, with the signing of this legislation, we signal to the descendants of enslaved New Yorkers and to the Black community as a whole that we are on a path to build a better society and to make sure that everyone prospers together. We believe in the values of Excelsior, which means justice for all, fairness for all, opportunity for all. And I thank everyone because this is a very emotional day for myself. And I want to extend the deepest gratitude to every person that played a role in bringing this shared vision and fruition. To Speaker Hasty, thank you so much for convening us. For Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins, thank you for your work. To the governor and her team, her amazing team, thank you for believing in this dream. I also want to thank the members of the Black, Hispanic, Puerto Rican, Asian Caucus. If we can have them stand. We would not be here without the strength of each and every one of these individuals. And especially to Senator Brisport, my initial partner, and Senator James Sanders. It sometimes takes 2 to get to the finish line. To Eljoy, who was on the ground, and NAACP. Yeah. To the December 12th movement, to NCROBRA, Dr. Ron Daniels, of Moral Compass. To the executive director of the caucus, I want to give a shout out to Joshua Joseph. There's many times I wanted to give up on this bill, but he kept us going. And I do want to acknowledge former Assemblymember Charles Barron, who started and propelled this conversation of reparations. And to those individuals that came before us, like Queen Mother Moore, who is the mother of the modern day reparation, thank you. So whether you offered your time, your expertise, your knowledge, your listening ear, it has all made a major impact in this conversation. So to my fellow advocates for justice, let us heed the call and listen to the echoes that ring in the corridor of history. Let us listen to the epidemiologists like Aaron Mayer right here of the Adirondacks Council, who says that the generational trauma still exists today and we need to solve it. Let us declare this moment that it's not just a dream deferred, but a promise fulfilled. And as proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly, the theme for the International Decade is the promise of African descent recognition, justice, and development. That reparations represents a roadmap to healing, and together we can be a legacy, we can be the stewards of our legacy, where justice knows no delay. So I thank you, and I look forward to working with all you, because the work continues. We must go, and we must be united together. And we are going to prosper and uplift New York. But we know that this is not just about one state, but a united effort across this country to ensure that all of Americans are uplifted. And so I do want to bring up Dr. Williams, who's going to talk about the national effort of reparations. Thank you, everyone.
Governor Hochul, esteemed community members, and distinguished guests, thank you for inviting me to participate here today and the opportunity to reflect on such a momentous step forward in the pursuit of justice and reconciliation for the state of New York. But you heard so much history today, I kind of feel like departing from my prepared text simply to say that when Norman Lear passed away a short time ago, people asked what his best show was. And for those of us of a certain age, you remember Norman Lear. He produced all those shows in the 1970s like All in the Family and Maude. And people said, well, his best show is easily All in the Family. Some of us remember the theme song. Boy, the way Glenn Miller played, songs that made the hit parade. Guys like us, we had it made. But the irony is that Norman Lear chose to situate America's most lovable racists not in Birmingham, Alabama, not in Tallahatchie, Florida, not in South Carolina. He put them in Queens, New York. And that was a statement about how racism and racial inequality were a national problem. See, wounds produce narratives, and so much of what we've heard so far about the experience of Black New Yorkers is the result of us dealing with that wound. You can't talk about healing unless you acknowledge the wound to begin with. And as a scholar of the African-American experience and someone who's been involved in analogous efforts in Minnesota as one of the 3 appointed conveners of the 2021 St. Paul City Council Legislative Advisory Committee on Reparations, I understand the depth and commitment and courage required to take on this work. New York's decision to address these issues is significant, and for that, I thank you, Governor Hochul, and partners in the New York State Legislature. But inevitably, some will ask, why now and why is this necessary? Well, in June of 1964, New York Presbyterian minister and civil rights activist Milton Galamison offered an answer. Quote, I think for the first time in many years, whites in the North are actually confronted with the problem they tried to pretend only existed in the South, end quote. Galamison continued, lamenting the widespread coverage and acknowledgement of desegregation efforts in Alabama. With efforts in New York being chalked up to publicity seekers and rabble-rousers, he concluded, quote, you see, there's a distinction when the battle gets nearer to home, end quote. By recognizing the need for reparations, New York is taking on that battle much closer to home, acknowledging the truth that has been obscured for far too long, a truth that demands our attention, empathy, and collective action, and a truth that indicts us and names us as complicit if we do not openly and honestly address it. On issues of race, New York has often led in the wrong direction. In establishing the doctrine of separate but equal in 1896 in its Plessy versus Ferguson decision that became the basis for state-sanctioned segregation, the U.S. Supreme Court cited the precedent of a New York case from 1883 allowing for segregated schools in Brooklyn. And before the more familiar urban renewal schemes of the 1950s and 1960s obliterated Black neighborhoods to make way for federal highways in other states, New York's own Robert Moses innovated the practice in the 1920s, leveling the homes of Blacks and Latinos to make way for public highways and recreation spaces with access points that virtually ensured their exclusion. More than homes came down with those bulldozers. Say that again. More than homes came down with those bulldozers and policies. Dreams were shattered along with the pathways to building intergenerational wealth, contributing to the present reality of the racial wealth gap, racial segregation in housing, and other manifestations of what I like to call the 6 degrees of segregation that are deeply ingrained in the fabric of our nation as a whole, but also in the great state of New York. And this residential segregation, coupled with these racist education practices, is one of the reasons New York public schools remain among the most segregated in the nation. And these are only 2 stories. In this pivotal moment in our nation's history marked by a heightened awareness of systemic racism, New York can be a leader. Actually, I say you are a leader now in the right direction. We write that theme song from Archie Bunker, where they sing the part, Mr. We could use a man like Herbert Hoover again. They're gonna say, Mr. We could use a governor, ha-ha, and an assembly, ha-ha, and a Senate, the most diverse in the state's history, to lead again. Let me conclude. Reflecting on my experiences in St. Paul, I'm reminded of the challenges inherent in such an undertaking. The road to reparations is fraught with complexities and sensitivities, and the work ahead for New York will be challenging. Yet it is precisely in grappling with the difficult truths of our path that we pave the way for a more just and equitable future through the acknowledgement of historical wrongs and a commitment to rectify the imbalances they created. It is an investment in the healing of communities, a recognition of the strength and resilience of those who bore the brunt of systemic injustices, and a commitment to a future where equality and justice are not just ideals, but lived realities for all. This form of historical recovery is not only essential, it can also be transformative, not only for Black New Yorkers, but for all New Yorkers. As we move forward, let us carry the torch of justice with a shared resolve to learn from the past, acknowledge the present, and shape a future where the echoes of these historical injustices no longer reverberate so profoundly in the lives and structures of our community. I'll conclude by sharing that when Muhammad Ali passed away, Pat Bagley of the Salt Lake City News did a cartoon that said, Ali was the greatest not because he was the champ. Ali was the greatest because he was always the challenger. New York, be the challenger. This commission is the challenger. The governor has been the challenger. And we will move forward in a way that privileges justice and equality, not because we choose to cover up our history, but because we choose to challenge. We now have a video from Dr. Dukes.
Good morning. My name is Hazel Dukes. I'm president of the NAACP New York State Conference. Sorry I'm not with you in person, but let me say that I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to personally thank the governor and our legislative leaders for this tremendous step with the establishment of this commission. It will give us the chance to review and look at the history of African Americans in New York State. And when the report is done, it will give us the necessary tools where we should go for economic growth, for quality health, equity in education, job training, job creation, housing, and many more things. So this is a great day for New York State moving in the right direction of inclusion for all people. Again, thanks to the governor and to our legislators leaders for taking this tremendous step.
Seated as we sign the bill.